A lonely billionaire agrees to one last blind date as a joke only to meet the woman who turns his carefully built world upside down and teaches him what love truly means. Ethan Caldwell sat in his sleek modern office, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. The sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in golden light, but Ethan barely noticed. He was lost in thought, thinking about the endless meetings, the stock reports, the new acquisitions, and the constant pressure of running one of the largest tech companies in the world. On the surface, he had everything anyone could dream of: a multi-million-dollar penthouse, luxury cars, private jets, and a life that most people would kill for. But inside he felt empty, tired, and surprisingly lonely. For years, Ethan had poured all his energy into his work. Relationships had always been difficult for him. He had tried dating, of course, but the women he met either seemed to be after his money or were too intimidated by his wealth and status. He had grown bitter about the whole thing, convinced that no one could truly understand him or accept him for who he really was. Over time, he stopped trying. He focused solely on his company, his goals, and the image he had built. He told himself that he was happy, but deep down, he knew something was missing. That evening, his phone buzzed on the glass desk, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from his closest friend, Lucas, who had known Ethan since college. Lucas's message was simple but firm. One final blind date. Just go. Stop being stubborn, Ethan frowned. He didn't even like blind dates. The idea of being set up by friends to meet a stranger seemed ridiculous. Who would willingly sit across from someone they had never met? Pretending to enjoy small talk while secretly hoping the night would end quickly? It sounded like torture to him, but Lucas was persistent. Over the past few weeks, he, along with a few mutual friends, had tried to convince Ethan to at least give it one last shot. "Ethan," Lucas had said earlier over lunch, "you're a genius at business. But you're failing at the one thing that really matters. You need a chance. One final chance." Ethan had rolled his eyes, trying to brush it off. He hated relying on others for personal matters. The idea of letting someone else choose his potential partner felt humiliating. But after a week of relentless texts, calls, even showing him photos of the woman they thought would be perfect, he finally caved. He agreed, but only reluctantly. Ethan told himself it would be a joke, nothing more. A distraction from the monotony of his life. He didn't expect anything meaningful to come from it. He even imagined himself sitting across from the woman, nodding politely, and politely excusing himself after 30 minutes. That was the plan. He reminded himself repeatedly that he had work to do, contracts to sign, meetings to attend, and a busy life that didn't leave room for emotional complications. As the evening approached, Ethan found himself unusually nervous. Not because he was excited about meeting someone, but because the idea of being judged, of failing at something that wasn't a business deal, made him uncomfortable. He picked out his suit carefully, a charcoal gray ensemble that was sharp but understated. He wanted to appear confident, collected, and in control like always, but he felt the tension building in his chest. When he arrived at the restaurant, it was almost empty, with only a few other diners scattered across the tables. The warm lighting and soft background music made the atmosphere cozy, yet Ethan's mind was elsewhere. He checked his watch, his phone, and the menu, trying to distract himself from the strange flutter of anticipation he couldn't quite explain. Then he saw her. Ava Morgan. She walked in with a calm confidence that immediately caught his attention. Ethan had met many women in his life, but there was something different about her. She didn't walk in like she was expecting attention. She simply carried herself with ease, a natural poise that didn't demand admiration, but commanded it anyway. Her smile was warm, genuine, and slightly mischievous, as if she already knew a secret that no one else did. Ethan felt a strange tug in his chest, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Ava approached the table with a friendly greeting and extended her hand.
"Ethan,"
she asked, her voice calm and confident. He nodded, shaking her hand, feeling the unexpected electricity of the moment. For a billionaire CEO who rarely let his guard down, it was disarming. She didn't seem impressed by his status, nor did she appear intimidated. She treated him like a person, not a bank account or a title. The initial conversation was awkward, as Ethan had anticipated. They exchanged the usual pleasantries, talking about the restaurant, the city, and trivial things to fill the silence. But slowly, the tension began to ease. Ava laughed at his jokes well, the ones that were meant to be jokes, and even teased him gently when he got slightly arrogant. It was refreshing, unexpected, and strangely comforting. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a real connection forming, even if he didn't fully understand it as they talked. Ethan realized that Ava was not just beautiful, she was intelligent, witty, and self-assured. She asked questions that went beyond small talk, questions that made him think, questions that he usually reserved for board meetings or business negotiations. She challenged his assumptions, gently probed his thoughts, and listened when he spoke, without judgment or pretense. It was an entirely new experience for him, one that both excited and frightened him. Throughout the evening, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how strange it was that he had been so certain this date would be a joke. He had expected boredom, discomfort, and perhaps even irritation. But instead he found himself laughing, opening up, and genuinely enjoying someone's company. He was aware of the rarity of the moment and the danger of letting himself feel vulnerable. But he also couldn't deny the possibility that this might be more than just a casual encounter. By the time dessert arrived, Ethan had forgotten all about the careful plans he had made to keep the evening brief. He found himself leaning in, engaging fully in the conversation, and genuinely curious about Ava's life, her thoughts, and her perspective. He noticed the way she listened intently, how her eyes sparkled with interest, and how effortlessly she made him feel comfortable. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of connection, of warmth, of something beyond the walls of his office and the comfort of his routine. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan realized he didn't want it to end. He had come expecting a joke, a distraction, maybe even a confirmation of his belief that no one could understand him. But Ava had challenged that expectation in every possible way. She had walked into his carefully controlled world and turned it upside down. Not with drama or pressure, but simply by being herself. Ethan walked her to her car, and for a brief moment he hesitated, unsure what to say or do. He had never been good at expressing personal feelings, especially to someone he barely knew. But the connection he felt was undeniable, a spark he couldn't ignore. As they said goodbye, he felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a mixture of hope, excitement, and nervous anticipation for what might come next. Driving back to his penthouse, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. Every detail, the way she smiled, the sound of her laughter, the questions she had asked her played in his mind. He realized that something significant had shifted within him. He had gone into the evening expecting nothing and had discovered that perhaps the world still held surprises, even for someone like him. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope that this blind date might not be the joke he had feared. It might be the beginning of something he never thought he would find. Ethan arrived at the restaurant a little early, his mind still buzzing from the anticipation of the blind date. He had tried to calm himself on the drive over, repeating to himself that it was just a casual dinner, nothing more. But deep down, he felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. He straightened his suit jacket, ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and checked the reflection in the glass door. Everything looked in place, yet his heart refused to settle. He hated admitting it, but there was something about the idea of meeting someone new, someone who didn't already know him as the billionaire CEO, that made him uneasy and excited at the same time. He scanned the room casually, noting the other diners quietly chatting or enjoying their meals, but there was no one who matched the description Lucas had sent him. Ethan had only a vague idea of who he might be meeting, and he had refused to look at the photos his friends had insisted he see. He wanted to go in without any preconceptions, expecting nothing, hoping for even less. Then she walked in. Ava Morgan moved with a confidence that was immediately noticeable. But it wasn't flashy or pretentious. She didn't demand attention. She simply had it. Ethan's breath caught for a moment, not because she was stunning, which she absolutely was, but because there was a natural ease in her presence that instantly put him on edge. She wasn't intimidated by the quiet grandeur of the restaurant, or by the whispered rumors of the wealthy and powerful that seemed to hang around in such places. She simply walked, smiled, and acknowledged the host, then spotted Ethan and made her way over with an effortless grace. Ethan stood up, suddenly aware that he had been holding his breath. "Ava?" he asked, extending his hand. "Yes," she replied with a warm, confident smile. "It's nice to meet you, Ethan." Her handshake was firm, friendly, and somehow grounding. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, just a simple, genuine greeting. For someone like Ethan, who was used to people either fawning over him or being intimidated, this was startling. They sat down, and the initial conversation began in the typical Wapolite small talk about the restaurant, the city, and the traffic on the way. Ethan expected it to be stiff and uncomfortable, a forced attempt at politeness that would eventually fizzle out. But Ava had a way of making even the simplest topics feel engaging. Her voice was calm, expressive, and her laughter was light, unforced. She listened genuinely, nodded thoughtfully, and occasionally teased him in a subtle, playful way that made him laugh despite himself. The more they talked, the more Ethan noticed how different she was from the women he had met in his world of wealth and influence. Ava didn't comment on his expensive watch or the designer suit he wore. She didn't ask him about his bank account or the number of companies he owned. She didn't even glance at his phone when it buzzed on the table. Instead, she asked questions that made him think, questions that challenged his usual way of talking about life. "What do you do when you're not working?" she asked casually. "Not counting sleeping, I mean." Ethan froze for a moment, taken aback by the simplicity and honesty of the question. He realized he had spent so much of his life running from downtime that he couldn't even remember what he did for fun. He shrugged, trying to sound casual, but Ava's curiosity was genuine, not judgmental. "I don't really have much time for that," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. She smiled knowingly. "That sounds lonely," she said softly, but without accusation. Her tone was gentle, more like observation than criticism. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. For once, someone wasn't judging him, pressuring him, or trying to impress him. She was simply noticing, understanding. The conversation shifted naturally from there. They talked about childhood memories, their favorite books, the little things that made them happy, and the things that annoyed them. Ethan found himself opening up about experiences he rarely shared with anyone. He spoke about the pressures of growing up in a family where success was expected, the constant scrutiny he faced, and the mistakes he had made in relationships. With every word, Ava listened carefully, sometimes laughing, sometimes nodding, but always encouraging him to continue. It was strange for Ethan to realize that he was actually enjoying himself, not in a polite, controlled way, but fully, completely. He wasn't calculating responses or hiding behind a wall of arrogance. He was just talking, sharing, laughing. The sensation was disorienting, thrilling, and slightly terrifying all at once. Ava shared her own stories too, though with a different kind of vulnerability. She spoke about the challenges of building her own career, the moments when she doubted herself, and the heartbreak she had faced. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was simply being honest. Ethan noticed how confident she was, how self-assured, yet open enough to admit her flaws. It was a combination he had rarely encountered, and it fascinated him. As the evening progressed, Ethan became increasingly aware of his own reactions. He felt drawn to her authenticity, her ease, and the way she seemed completely unaffected by his wealth or status. He found himself leaning slightly forward, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, instead of rehearsing what he should say next. Every laugh, every smile, every small exchange felt electric. A connection he hadn't experienced in years. He noticed little details he normally wouldn't, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the subtle gestures of her hands as she spoke, the confident tilt of her head when she was curious about something. Each detail made him more aware of her presence, more aware of the fact that this was not like any other date he had been on. There was a moment when the waiter brought their food, and Ethan realized he hadn't even glanced at the menu. He wasn't hungry. He was too focused on the conversation, on the way Ava made him feel seen and heard. He caught himself smiling unconsciously, something he hadn't done in a long time. The evening, which he had entered expecting awkwardness and boredom, was unfolding in ways he never imagined. At one point, Ava leaned back slightly, looking thoughtful. "You know," she said, "I didn't expect to enjoy tonight this much. I honestly thought this would be awkward, like most blind dates." Her honesty struck Ethan. He realized he had been thinking the same thing but hadn't admitted it out loud. "I feel the same," he admitted, a small smile forming on his lips. "I thought this would be just another formality. A polite conversation I could survive." Javier laughed softly, and for a moment, the weight of his world, his responsibilities, his wealth, his reputation felt lighter. Here with her, he was just Ethan, not a billionaire CEO, not a business genius, not a man constantly guarded by walls of control. Just a man talking to a woman who seemed to understand him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and unexpected comfort. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had felt so at ease, so engaged, so alive in someone's presence. He noticed that his usual defenses, the walls he had built around his heart, were slowly lowering. He felt something stirring inside him, something he had almost forgotten. Hope. As the night drew to a close, they shared a quiet moment by the door. Ethan realized he didn't want this evening to end. He didn't want to return to his solitary apartment, his predictable routine, or the emptiness that often greeted him after work. He wanted to know more about her, to spend more time with her, to see where this connection could lead. When they said goodbye, Ava smiled warmly and casually said, "I had a really nice time tonight." "Ethan, thank you for coming." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I did too," he replied. For once, he didn't add anything about his wealth, his schedule, or his usual guarded self. He simply said what he felt, and it felt right. Driving home, Ethan replayed the evening over and over in his mind. Every detail, every laugh, every glance, and every word she had spoken stayed with him. He realized that this blind date, which he had expected to be trivial or even silly, had turned into something entirely unexpected. It was more than a casual dinner. It was a moment that challenged him, made him feel alive, and opened the door to the possibility that life could surprise him in ways he never imagined. For the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't entirely dictated by business, money, and control. He imagined laughter, shared moments, and connection with someone who truly saw him not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a person. The thought was thrilling and terrifying all at once, and deep down, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Ava the next morning, her laughter, the sparkle in her eyes. The way she had challenged him without making him feel small, all of it played over and over in his mind. He usually woke up early, diving straight into emails, meetings, and strategy calls, but today was different. His thoughts kept drifting back to last night, to the way the conversation had flowed, to how natural it had felt to just be himself. It was both exhilarating and confusing. He wasn't used to letting anyone in, and yet with Ava, it had felt effortless. By the time he arrived at his office, Ethan realized that something had shifted inside him. Normally, he would be focused on numbers, graphs, and business deals. But today, he found himself doodling absent-mindedly during a morning meeting. His mind wandered to the stories Ava had shared, to the way she had described her work, her passions, and her challenges. He realized he wanted to know more about her life, not just the surface details, but the real Ava, her fears, her dreams, and the moments that had shaped her. Meanwhile, Ava was also thinking about him. She had never been impressed by wealth or status, yet Ethan had intrigued her in ways she hadn't expected. He had a quiet confidence, intelligence, and a sense of humor that wasn't forced. He listened when she spoke, genuinely engaged, and seemed to enjoy the simplest conversations without overanalyzing them. She noticed the flashes of vulnerability, In him, the hints of loneliness that his life of luxury couldn't mask. And somehow she felt drawn to it. Wanting to see the layers beneath the polished exterior, a few days later, they decided to meet again. Ethan suggested a quiet, casual place, something far removed from the high-end restaurants he usually frequented. He wanted Ava to feel comfortable, not intimidated. When she arrived, Ethan felt the same familiar stir of nervous excitement. She looked relaxed and confident, and the way she greeted him with a warm smile made his chest tighten unexpectedly. It was becoming clear that the connection between them was growing stronger, and that both of them were curious about where it might lead. As they sat down, the conversation quickly moved beyond small talk. Ava asked Ethan about his childhood, and for the first time, he felt safe enough to speak about it openly. He told her about growing up in a family where expectations were always high, where every success had to be measured and every failure scrutinized. He spoke about the loneliness of his early years, the pressure to succeed, and the fear of letting people down. As he spoke, he noticed that Ava listened without judgment, without interruption, just absorbing every word with genuine interest. Her reaction was different from anyone he had ever met. She didn't tee off her cliches or pity. She simply acknowledged his experiences and asked thoughtful questions. "How did that make you feel?" she asked at one point, and the simplicity of the question struck him. No one had ever really asked him that before. People had asked what he had achieved or how he had managed, but no one had asked about the emotional impact of it all. With Ava, he could explore parts of himself he had long ignored or buried. Ethan also learned about Ava's life. She spoke about her career with passion and dedication, but she was equally candid about the struggles she had faced along the way. She had encountered setbacks, disappointments, and moments of self-doubt, yet she had persisted. She didn't present herself as perfect or flawless. Instead, she was honest about her journey, about the choices she had made, and the lessons she had learned. Ethan found himself admiring her resilience, her intelligence, and her ability to remain grounded despite the challenges life had thrown at her. They shared laughs and moments of quiet reflection, discovering that they had more in common than they had initially realized. Both had experienced disappointment in relationships. Both had faced loneliness, despite success in other areas of life. Both were searching for something authentic, something real that went beyond appearances or social expectations. For Ethan, this was a revelation. He had spent so long believing that people could never understand him or accept him for who he truly was. Yet here was Ava, listening, understanding, and even challenging him in ways that felt exciting and safe at the same time. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the conversation deepened. They spoke about their values, their dreams, and the things that mattered most to them. Ethan realized that he had been living a life dictated by other people's expectations, driven by ambition, and measured by achievements. Ava, on the other hand, had a different perspective. She valued connection, authenticity, and personal growth. Listening to her made him question some of his own priorities, and he felt a mixture of admiration and envy. He wanted to be more like her, more open and present in his own life. There were moments of playfulness, too. Ava teased him gently about his meticulous nature, his obsession with planning, and his tendency to overthink even the simplest situations. Ethan laughed, sometimes embarrassed, but always enjoying the lightness she brought to the conversation. For someone so used to controlling every aspect of his world, this was liberating. He realized that being around her allowed him to relax, to drop the walls he had built, and to experience life in a way he hadn't in years. At one point, Ava reached across the table and touched his hand briefly, a simple gesture that sent an unexpected jolt through him. He wasn't used to physical closeness, especially with someone he barely knew, yet it felt natural, reassuring, and strangely comforting. In that moment, he became aware of how much he wanted her presence, not just for the novelty or excitement, but because being with her made him feel more complete, more himself. Ethan began to reflect on the patterns of his past relationships. He realized that he had often pushed people away, either intentionally or unintentionally, because he was afraid of being hurt or misunderstood. With Ava, however, he felt something different. He felt curiosity instead of fear, excitement instead of hesitation. She had a way of gently unraveling his defenses, making him question the walls he had built around his heart. For the first time in a long time, he considered the possibility that love could exist without complication, without manipulation, and without the pressure to perform or impress. Ava also seemed to notice the shifts in him. She saw the way his shoulders relaxed when he laughed, the way his eyes softened when he spoke about his past, and the moments when he seemed genuinely vulnerable. She didn't push him, didn't try to change him. She simply acknowledged it, allowing him to open up at his own pace. This respect for his boundaries made him trust her even more, deepening the connection that was steadily growing between them. As the evening came to a close, Ethan felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Didn't want the day to end, didn't want to return to his penthouse and the silence that greeted him every night. Yet he also realized that this growing bond came with risks. He had rarely let anyone get close enough to matter, and allowing himself to care for someone so deeply felt both thrilling and frightening. The uncertainty was new, and yet he found himself longing for it. Walking her to her car, Ethan felt the weight of the evening settle in. He wanted to say more, to express the depth of his feelings, but the words felt inadequate. Ava sensed his hesitation and smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips that seemed to reassure him. "I had a wonderful time today," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Ethan nodded, a quiet smile forming. "Me too," he replied, and it was the truth. For once he didn't feel the need to hide behind humor, charm, or control. He could simply be himself, and that was enough. As he drove home, Ethan reflected on the afternoon and evening. He realized that Ava had challenged him in ways he hadn't expected. She had asked questions, sparked curiosity, and revealed perspectives that made him rethink parts of his life. He recognized that he was starting to feel something he had long avoided: hope, excitement, and the possibility of a real connection. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, but he knew he didn't want to ignore it. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the world opening up around him in unexpected ways. He had gone from a man convinced that love and connection were impossible for him to someone who was beginning to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, life had more to offer than work, wealth, and solitude. And he knew that Ava was at the center of that change, the person who had quietly begun to reshape his world simply by being herself. Ethan's life had begun to shift in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself thinking about Ava constantly, replaying their conversations and laughter in his mind, and even imagining what it would be like to see her again. He had grown so used to controlling every aspect of his world that the unpredictability of his feelings both thrilled and terrified him. He hadn't felt this vulnerable in years, and the truth was, he didn't know what to do with it. That evening, he was preparing for another dinner with Ava. He had picked a cozy little bistro downtown, one that was quiet and intimate, the kind of place where conversations felt private and time seemed to slow down. Ethan had arrived early, trying to calm the strange flutter in his chest. He straightened his jacket, ran a hand over his hair, and looked around. Taking in the soft lighting and the faint smell of fresh bread, everything seemed perfect, yet a tiny part of him was anxious. Ava arrived right on time. As usual, looking radiant in a simple, elegant outfit, her presence had a way of immediately filling the space, making it feel warmer, more alive. Ethan greeted her with a smile that he couldn't quite suppress, feeling the familiar pull in his chest. For a moment, it felt like the world outside the bistro didn't exist. All that mattered was the conversation, the laughter, and the shared connection that had begun to grow between them. They began talking as they always did, easy, playful, and full of curiosity. But as the evening progressed, a subtle tension began to creep in. Ethan noticed it first: a distant look in Ava's eyes, a hesitation in her voice. He asked her if everything was okay, and she smiled, brushing it off, but he sensed that something was off. He didn't press immediately, deciding to wait to give her space while still being attentive. Then it happened. A man entered the bistro, scanning the room before his gaze settled on Ethan. Ethan recognized him immediately: Marcus Cole, a former business rival who had always envied his success and tried, subtly and not so subtly, to undermine him at every turn. Marcus was known for being manipulative, charming, in a way that hid his ambition and ruthlessness. Seeing him here at this moment sent a spike of anxiety through Ethan. Marcus approached the table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ethan Caldwell," he said smoothly, extending a hand. "Fancy seeing you here." Ata. Ethan shook his hand politely, but the tension in his chest didn't ease. He noticed Ava's subtle reaction too. She had gone slightly rigid, her curiosity turning to caution. Ethan realized that this was not a casual coincidence. Marcus was here for a reason, and he had a feeling it had nothing to do with dining out. Marcus began talking, slowly, deliberately, bringing up old business dealings, making thinly veiled comments about Ethan's past decisions, and even questioning his recent acquisitions. Ethan tried to maintain composure, responding politely but firmly, but the encounter was unsettling. He could feel Ava watching him closely, sensing his discomfort. And it made him even more aware of how exposed he felt not just to Marcus, but to the emotional vulnerability he was beginning to feel around Ava, as Marcus's questions became more pointed. Ava finally interjected, speaking calmly but firmly. "I think we're fine, Ethan. You don't need to engage with him." Her voice was steady, yet there was a protective quality in it that caught Ethan off guard. He realized she wasn't just a passive observer in his life. She was someone willing to stand beside him, to support him when he needed it most. That realization stirred something deep inside him. A mixture of gratitude, admiration, and the beginnings of affection. Marcus, sensing the shift in dynamics, smiled thinly and excused himself, leaving the table with an air of calculated retreat. Ethan exhaled, feeling the tension drain slowly from his shoulders. But he also felt the after effects, the heightened awareness of how fragile the evening had suddenly become. He looked at Ava, noticing the concern in her eyes, and felt a wave of protectiveness and appreciation. He realized that he cared more about her well-being than he had expected. And that thought made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. Once Marcus was gone, Ethan tried to return the conversation to a lighter, more personal tone, but the disruption had left an impression. They talked about their careers, their lives, and the pressures they faced. But now, there was an underlying seriousness that hadn't been there before. Ethan found himself reflecting on how easily life could be disrupted, how quickly things could change, and how much he valued the moments of genuine connection he was sharing with Ava. Ava noticed the shift in Ethan too. She gently asked him about the pressures he faced, the expectations he had to live up to, the way he carried the weight of his responsibilities. Ethan, feeling the trust that had developed between them, opened up more than he ever had before. He spoke about the loneliness that accompanied his success, the fear of being misunderstood, and the constant struggle to find someone who saw him for who he really was. Ava listened intently, nodding, occasionally asking questions that encouraged him to explore his feelings further. It was during this conversation that Ethan realized how deeply Ava had begun to affect him. He wasn't just enjoying her company. He was beginning to feel a connection that scared him. He was aware of his own vulnerability, of how much he wanted her approval, her understanding, and perhaps even her affection. For someone who had spent so long controlling every aspect of his life, this was both exhilarating and terrifying. Ava, sensing his internal conflict, offered quiet reassurance. "You don't have to be perfect, Ethan," she said softly. "I like the real you, not the CEO, not the businessman, just you." Her words struck him with an intensity he hadn't expected. He had spent so much of his life hiding behind titles and wealth, afraid that people only valued him for what he had achieved or owned. Hearing that someone could see past all of that and still care about him was overwhelming. The evening continued, now filled with a mixture of laughter, heartfelt conversation, and moments of comfortable silence. Ethan found himself noticing every detail about Ava the way she listened. The warmth in her smile, the subtle expressions that revealed her thoughts. He was captivated, and he felt a growing desire to protect this connection, to nurture it, to see where it might lead. As the night drew to a close, they walked out of the bistro together. The city streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of streetlights. Ethan felt a rush of emotions, excitement, nervousness. In a deep awareness of how much he had begun to care for Ava, he realized that the risks of opening his heart were real. But the potential rewards were far greater than he had imagined. Standing by her car, Ethan hesitated, unsure how to express what he was feeling. He wanted to tell her how much the evening had meant to him, how much her presence had changed the way he viewed his life, but the words felt inadequate. Ava, sensing his uncertainty, smiled and reached for his hand. "I had a wonderful evening," she said simply. "Thank you for trusting me." Ethan felt a surge of emotion. Trust was something he rarely offered, but here it was, reciprocated in a way that filled him with warmth and hope. He realized that life was unpredictable, that challenges and unexpected encounters could disrupt even the most controlled of worlds, and that these disruptions could lead to growth, connection, and something truly meaningful. Driving home, Ethan reflected on the night. He knew that letting himself care for Ava, letting himself be vulnerable, was risky. But he also knew that avoiding that risk would mean missing out on something extraordinary. The encounter with Marcus had reminded him that life was fragile and unpredictable, but it had also shown him the importance of connection, support, and courage. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a deep sense of possibility. He had begun to open his heart to trust someone outside of his carefully constructed world, and to imagine a future that included not just success and wealth, but companionship, understanding, and love. Ava had challenged him, supported him, and inspired him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and in that moment, Ethan understood something profound. Life's most valuable moments often came from taking risks, from opening oneself to vulnerability, and from embracing connections that could change everything. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing with certainty. He didn't want to let Ava go. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Ava after that evening. Driving home, replaying every word, every glance, every subtle smile, he realized just how much she had already changed his world. It was more than attraction, more than curiosity. Ava had awakened a part of him he had buried under work, ambition, in routine, the part that wanted connection, warmth, and a life shared with someone who truly understood him. The next few days were a strange mix of exhilaration and anxiety. Ethan found himself checking his phone more than usual, hoping for a message, a call, anything from Ava. He had never been the kind of man to chase anyone, to show interest openly, but with her, it felt natural. He wanted to know more about her day, her thoughts, her dreams. He wanted to share his own life beyond the business meetings, the contracts, and the carefully curated image of himself. For the first time, he felt compelled to lower his guard. Finally, they arranged another meeting, this time at a quiet park with winding paths and a small fountain in the center. Ethan chose it because it was casual, natural, and far from the polished, high-pressure environments he was used to. He arrived early, his nerves surprisingly evident despite his usual calm exterior. The soft rustling of leaves and the gentle sound of water from the fountain created a peaceful atmosphere, one that Ethan hoped would allow him to simply be present. Without pretense or expectation, Ava arrived, as always, with effortless charm. She greeted him with a bright smile, her eyes reflecting the warmth and curiosity that had first drawn him in. Ethan felt a sudden rush of emotion, a mix of excitement and vulnerability as he realized that he cared deeply about this woman, more than he had intended or expected. They began walking along the paths, the conversation flowing naturally as they discussed their favorite books, movies, and memories from childhood. But beneath the laughter and playful teasing, Ethan felt the weight of what he wanted to say, what he needed to express. As they reached a quiet spot by the fountain, Ethan stopped walking. He looked at Ava, really looked at her, and realized that he couldn't continue pretending he wasn't feeling something profound. The vulnerability he had been resisting for so long rose to the surface. "Ava," he began, his voice a little unsteady. "There's something I need to tell you." Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression gentle but curious. "What is it?" she asked softly, her eyes meeting his with unwavering attention. Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been so used to controlling everything in my life, keeping people at a distance, convincing myself that no one could understand me. But with you, it's different. You make me want to be open, to be honest, to be more than I've allowed myself to be for years." He paused, feeling the intensity of the moment. "I care about you, Ava, more than I thought I ever could care about anyone." For a moment, there was silence. Ethan feared he had said too much, that he had overstepped, that he had somehow ruined everything by being vulnerable. Then Ava smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made his chest loosen. She reached out and gently took his hand. "Ethan," she said, "I've felt the same way. From the first evening, I sensed that there was more to you than anyone else has ever seen. You're kind, thoughtful, and real. I like the real you, and I care about you too." Ethan felt a rush of relief and joy, the tension of his fears melting away in that moment. The connection they had been building, the laughter, the shared stories, subtle understanding of each other had culminated in something powerful, something genuine. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that love could exist without pretense, without conditions. And without the fear of being misunderstood, they spent the rest of the afternoon talking, laughing, and sharing moments of quiet reflection. Ethan found himself opening up about things he had never shared with anyone: his insecurities, the loneliness he felt despite his success, and the dreams he had abandoned in pursuit of wealth and status. Ava listened patiently, her presence calm and reassuring. She shared her own fears and hopes as well, creating a balance that felt natural, comfortable, and deeply intimate. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Ethan realized how much he had grown in just a few weeks. Ava had not only shown him the possibility of love, but it also inspired him to reevaluate his life, his priorities, and the way he approached relationships. He understood that vulnerability was not weakness, but a bridge to meaningful connection. He had allowed himself to be seen, truly seen, and in return, he had seen someone remarkable in a way that transcended beauty, status, or superficial attraction. Ava, noticing the reflective expression on Ethan's face, smiled gently. "You're thinking about everything so deeply, Ethan," she said. "But I like that. It shows you care. And it shows me that what we have, it's real," Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I've been living my life so cautiously, building walls around myself, avoiding anything that might hurt me. But you've shown me that it's worth taking the risk. That connection, trust, and love, they're worth it, even if it's scary." They walked hand in hand along the paths, the city skyline visible in the distance, the world around them quiet and peaceful. Ethan felt a deep sense of contentment, the kind that came from knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be, with someone who truly understood him. The walls he had built so carefully over the years had begun to crumble, replaced by trust, vulnerability, and the hope of a shared future. As night fell, they reached Ava's car. Ethan felt a tug in his chest, a reluctance to end the evening, to return to his solitary apartment and the predictable life he had known for so long. He wanted more time, more moments, more of the connection that had transformed his world. Ava looked at him, sensing the unspoken words. "I had an amazing day, Ethan," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing this with me, for trusting me." Ethan took a deep breath, a smile forming on his lips. "No, thank you, Ava, for being yourself, for being real, for showing me what I've been missing all these years." He leaned slightly closer, feeling the warmth of her presence, and she met him halfway with a gentle, meaningful smile. Driving home later that night, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened over the past weeks. He realized that his life had been transformed not by business deals, contracts, or wealth, but by someone who saw him for who he truly was and accepted him without condition. Ava had flipped his world upside down, challenging his assumptions, opening his heart, and showing him the beauty of genuine connection. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future filled not just with success, but with love, laughter, and partnership. He imagined waking up each morning beside someone who made him feel alive, someone who encouraged him to grow, and someone who loved him for the person he was, not for what he owned. The thought was both thrilling and comforting. and it filled him with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Ethan knew there would be challenges ahead. That life was unpredictable and full of twists, but he no longer feared them. With Ava by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came their way, knowing that together they could navigate the highs and lows, the joys and sorrows, and everything in between. By the time he reached his penthouse, Ethan felt a rare sense of peace. He looked out over the city, the lights twinkling below, and realized that the world was suddenly brighter, more vibrant, and filled with possibility. Ava had changed him in ways he hadn't thought possible, showing him that the greatest rewards in life were not in wealth or power, but in connection, trust, and love. As he settled into his apartment, he smiled, thinking of Ava, of their moments together, and of the future they might share. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt complete, hopeful, and ready to embrace life with an open heart. And deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning of a beautiful story, one that he and Ava would write together, full of laughter, growth, and endless possibilities.